Welcome back, America. I love a great coincidence, and especially a string of them on this St. Patrick's Day. I'm so pleased to welcome Andrew McCarthy. Andrew McCarthy, of course, not one of our Italian friends from New York, but a good old Irish Catholic kid from New York. And Andy, coincidence number 2 is that today I picked up 3 new affiliates in the Hudson Valley. And the Hudson Valley affiliates are I got to make sure I get them in front of me so I don't get them wrong. They're called The Beacon, WGHQ 920 AM, 92.5 FM, WLNA 1260 AM, WBNR 1420. Is the Hudson Valley Yankee land or is it Mets land?
You know, back in the day, Hugh, New York was still kind of a National League town. I really think the Yankees made big inroads in the Hudson Valley, just like they did throughout the city. Not just in those great teams in the 70s, but in particular the great teams they had in the 90s over the turn of the century, where they really took the city over. But I have hope that things are changing.
Well, I know they're Knicks fans. I got told by my program director.
Oh, yeah.
And that's too bad because the Cavs are going to crush the Knicks. Okay, third coincidence. St. Patrick's Day, Andy McCarthy's on. We're on the Hudson Valley for the first time. And we're talking about Ex parte McClellan, Korematsu, and the non-acquiescence doctrine, political question, stuff that we've never, this is a case of first impression. And as we speak, Andy, the judge, a district court judge, has the Department of Justice in front of him in a special hearing, and it appears that the DOJ is not answering his questions.
Right.
Have you ever seen anything like this?
I haven't, Hugh, but I have to say, I had the good fortune of spending the run-up to St. Patty's Day watching college baseball in Lexington, Kentucky this weekend. So I couldn't get too deep into this, but I did get deep enough to see what you were saying about it.
Well, I had the good fortune as a law clerk to work on a political question case involving terrorism. So I spent a good year working for Judge Robb on that case. So all I can remember is nobody wants to touch this stuff.
Yeah, well, look, I think 2 things. One is, as I sort of scoped out legally what was going on, it really powerfully hit me over the head that I don't think the administration is overly concerned about the law. I happen to think the Alien Enemies Act gambit is really problematic in that they're going to lose on that. And, we can talk about McClellan and, the Korematsu and all the rest of it. But I think what you need to look at is the post 9/11 cases, particularly, Hamdi, Razul, and Boumediene, where the court made it very clear that even enemy combatants in wartime who were detained overseas have a right to challenge their detention in court. I don't agree with those cases, but they are Supreme Court cases.
So, Andy, my reaction to those, tell me your quick is that was not this court, that was Anthony Kennedy's court and Stephen Breyer's court, and Boumediene especially is bad law. And I don't think the Supreme Court wants to take this case as a vehicle to overturn those cases.
Right.
But I do believe they'll have to if they take the case, which is why I think this case will never get to the court.
Yeah, well, I think as a matter of the first instance, we have to put ourselves in Judge Boasberg's shoes, which I think, unfairly, I'm not a Boasberg fan.
He's not a bad guy. He's not a bad judge. He gets along with everyone. He's not a terrible, crazy judge.
Yeah, I wasn't crazy about his FISA rulings. He was the chief judge of the FISA court, I think, for a while. And I think he did a lot more to I can't blame him for this. They're trying to preserve the system. I think the system should be dismantled. I know that's a conversation for another day. But I don't think he's a terrible judge. But whether I thought he was the worst judge in history or not, he's bound to follow those decisions. So obviously he would have, since what Trump is trying to do here is not only unprecedented, it's not. I mean, it's precedented in the sense that we've had 3 congressionally declared wars where this statute was invoked.
All right, hold on. While I go to break, I'm going to talk with Andy during the break. Now, Andy, I want to go back to the Boumediene trio. Those were combatants, unlawful combatants, brought to the United States and vested with rights by a series of decisions with which we can agree or disagree. I don't like them.
No. Well, wait now. They were enemy combatants who were held outside the United States, which is, I think, a pretty significant
Okay,
fact.
weren't they on American territory, though? Weren't these all Gitmo cases?
No, that's, you're thinking of like Padilla, which opened the whole.
Okay.
Padilla was an American enemy combatant who they decided to detain here as an enemy combatant, and that was a big to-do over whether they could do that, when he was an American citizen and the courts were open and functioning. And we got, you would have loved this. You did love it at the time. We got into the German saboteur.
Oh, yeah. Oh, God, yes. But I put that all over on the side because we're not trying to prosecute these people to put them to death. We're just ejecting them. That's why I'm trying to draw a big division between the president is simply ejecting people from our country who have invaded it under a declaration never been seen before of a non-nation state party invading our country, allegedly aligned with a nation state party, but we don't know that. And so I just think it's utterly without precedent, and I'm not even sure those three cases or Padilla applies. So argue to me that they should.
Well, I think, first of all, the issue in those cases was whether habeas corpus was available to people who were challenging their treatment. No one was trying to put those guys on trial, by the way. It was their detention as enemy combatants and the disposition of them under those circumstances and whether that was appropriate. So it certainly seems to me that since what these guys are trying to, these guys were in the United States where the court is open and functioning. They've never been prosecuted for terrorism. We have the say-so of the president and nothing else as a record that Tren de Aragua is a terrorist organization, which, they're trying to analogize it to Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah, which seems crazy to me. But wholly apart from that, Hugh, the statute we're talking about here is the reason that since the end of the 18th century that enemy or nationals of an enemy power have been detainable is because Congress jumped in and declared war. And the lesson out of the post 9/11 cases, remember, is that the court said in the absence of a true emergency, the president needs to work with Congress on a system for how we're going to deal with these detainees. And I do not see how the courts are going to turn around and say, Trump can do this on his own. No Congress, no anything. He can just bat his eyes and say they're terrorists, and then he can boot them out of the country with no due process.
Okay, when we come back from break, I'm going to make the argument to Andy that, in fact, he can do that under the language of the statute that will matter a lot more to this court than to the Bush-era court. That's going to be my argument. Don't go anywhere. Andy's coming right back on. Welcome back, America. Andrew McCarthy is with me. During the break, I told Andy I want to give him the floor. My argument is if ever there was a case for a political question abstention by the courts, it's this. Even though habeas was presented and the court was ignored, and I'm sure the judge is mad that this is an Article 2 issue, and that the statute, the Alien Enemy Act, says the president can declare he doesn't need a declaration of war. He can just declare it, and Congress has not repealed that, Andy. So I think you got 5 votes, if not 6 votes on this court to say he can do this. So talk us out of it.
Well, I couldn't disagree with that more, I'm afraid. I think, first of all, the statute mainly deals with nationals of the enemy state in wartime where Congress has declared war. And it's not enough to have de facto war. You actually have to have a congressional declaration of war. The other condition, the invasion or incursion, is obviously meant to be something that's the functional equivalent of war under circumstances where Congress hasn't had time to convene and declare war and the president has to take action. I don't think that this is analogous to that, particularly because this is something that I think it's a crisis and you think it's a crisis, but this has been going on for years. And I don't think anybody would say that, like, we're not going to analogize these guys to alien enemy combatants for any other purpose, right?
Well, I'm going to read the statute.
You're not saying, like, for example, combat operations would be.
No,
okay.
I think they are terrorists, and I think they have terrorized people. Here's the statute. Whenever there is a declared war between the United States and any foreign nation or government, not applicable, or any invasion or predatory incursion is perpetrated, attempted, or threatened against the territory of the United States by any foreign nation or government. So, and the president makes a public proclamation. So all he has to do is assert that the Venezuelan government, acting in whole or part with these gangs, has sent them into the United States for the purposes of wreaking havoc and doing the drug trade. I think that's all he has to. Go ahead.
Yeah, let me just say two things in response to that. First, one of the first things that would come into evidence is that tens of thousands of these guys were flown into the country by the Biden administration.
True, absolutely.
So, if you're going to say this is an invasion that the United States government aided and abetted, I think that's going to be a tough position in the court. And secondly, with respect to the post 9/11 cases, you made the very good point, I think, that this is basically a political question. It's about the president's Article 2 authority. I have a stack of jurisprudence, probably a mile high, for the proposition that a court has no business getting involved in the disposition of enemy combatants held overseas outside the United States territory in wartime. And it's much clearer than what we're talking about here, where these guys were actually held on civilian charges in the territorial United States. And yet the courts invaded President Bush's ability as commander-in-chief to control the disposition of enemy combatants who were being held in wartime that had been congressionally authorized.
And help me out here, Andy. Those were 5-4 decisions, right?
6-3. The most important one, I think, was Boumediene.
Yeah.
Which was 5-4 with blistering dissents from Roberts.
And I'm remembering the Roberts dissent. So I just think this court, maybe they will take it in order to get rid of Boumediene. I've always pronounced it Boumediene, by the way, and you're doing it differently. I'm going to trust your pronunciation. But they hated that decision because Anthony Kennedy kept screwing up the Bush administration. They tried again and again and again to deal with these people. And now we have this problem. The only way to end this is to let the executive be the executive and protect the country.
Yeah, I agree with you if we could be drawing on a clean slate. But I think that one of the things they're going to say, particularly because we don't have a clear situation, I know you think it's clearly an invasion. I think they're going to have a very hard time proving that, even though, 20 million people are now in this country.
Well, I'm just talking about the cartels. I don't think the invasion rhetoric works against an economic migrant. But if you can, are you proposing that the government would have to prove that there actually was a cartel and that members of the cartel have tattoos and that they have membership and they have instructions and commanders? I mean, at what level does it become onerous on the executive branch to have to prove things like this?
Yeah, what I'm saying is that and maybe I've just been too burned by the post 9/11 experience, but I think the court's inclination is going to be that the president can't do this on his own hook, that he has to go to Congress, and that if they legislate something that allows him to get them out of the country forthwith, I think the court would stay with that this time. But as you point out, the big problem with Boumediene, as Justice Scalia said, is they were just kidding, right? In the prior case, what Breyer had basically said is, go to Congress, work with Congress, get assistance with Congress. They did that, and then the court threw it out anyway.
And so I know that background. I just think that the reality of the world today, and you know this better than anyone, with WMD and with the weaponry that they have and the ability, 250,000 Chinese nationals in the country, we can't be this silly anymore. You've been saying this. I sound like Andy McCarthy, and you sound like the ACLU. I'm going to have to go lie down.
Because I've been burned on this 8 million times, and I sit here. Look, I would love Trump to be able to do this and to be trustworthy. But look, and I don't mean to undercut him when he's trying to do the right thing. But you can't run around saying, like, he who protects his country violates no law, and saying stuff that's going to spook the courts. And then when you want to go into them and say, oh, and by the way, give me unilateral authority to throw people out of the country, that's not the way you set up your situation. The arguments that you want to make with these courts.
Andy, we're going to have to talk a lot in the next couple of days because this poor judge, I actually feel bad for this judge. I feel bad for the D.C. Circuit. And I know that the Supreme Court doesn't want to do this either. Do you think he might just say 30 seconds? Moot. They're out of the country. Don't do it again.
No. I just think I think he's the chief judge of that very important court. He can't just let himself get defied the way they played games with him on Saturday.
Oh, boy, did they absolutely did. They punked him. And I don't like getting the courts punked. I'm not one for punking the courts. But I am for the political question doctrine and the chief executive protecting the country in times like these. Andy C. McCarthy. Follow him on Twitter at Andrew C. McCarthy. He knows more about this than anybody else in America, and he should be on Fox around the clock. Thank you, Andrew. I'll be right back. America, stay tuned.